vasudeva sutam devam kamsachanuramardanam devaki paramanandam krishno vande jagadgurum. Good morning. So this is our ongoing class on Bhagavad Gita in the light of Sri Ramakrishna. We are nearing the end of chapter 6 of the Gita. We're up to verse 32, and we'll be continuing with verse 33 today. And hopefully, without rushing, we will try to complete chapter 6 by the end of the month, because we have one more class. So today we're discussing, hopefully, verses 33 to 39 of chapter 6. And in our next class, which will be, I'll tell you in a second. Our next class is going to be Sunday, July 27th at 9:30 a.m. PST. We are going to hopefully discuss verses 40 to 47 of the Gita. Those are the final verses of the Gita. And I've assigned some study questions. So I'm giving you 2 weeks to do these study questions. They're a little philosophically heavy this time, just a warning in advance. So try to get an early start on them. And work hard on them. It's interesting. It's like comparative. I'm asking you guys to compare different interpretations of the same terms in the same verses. Okay? Now. Okay. Why don't you sit here? It'll be better. Okay. Yeah.
This is the 50th class.
Oh yeah, thank you for reminding me.
Online audience.
Yay! 50th class. That's a milestone right there.
Yeah.
You guys hung in there, or hanging in there, which is impressive for the kind of class this is. And I really appreciate all your sincerity and hard work, both in person and online. So let's keep it up. We're a third of the way through the book at class 50, which means we should get through it in 2 years or something. But hopefully earlier than that. We'll see. Because I've started doing like 3 classes per month now, sort of, when I can. But I'm going to South Africa from July 31st through August 14th. And so hopefully I'll still sneak in 2 classes in August if we can. Okay, now, let's plunge in. But before we get into the new verses, starting with verse 33, it's a testament to your thoughtfulness that even your YouTube comments are not like the Rabble's comments. So you're one person whose username is a little obscure. It's at LEATUI7, 5 days ago. Made this comment on the previous class, and I think it's important enough to address, actually, because a lot of you might have similar questions. Anybody who knows something about Sri Aurobindo's work may have this question. Here's what this person says. Remember last time, in our last class, I mentioned Sri Aurobindo's Yoga and Its Objects, an essay that he wrote around 1911. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the 3 stages in spiritual realization, and I was linking it to the previous verses and so on and so forth. It's in that context that this person says, I think it is important to keep in mind when referring to Sri Aurobindo's 1912 work, Yoga and Its Objects, that he later said this book represented an early stage of his sadhana, and he considered it no longer a representation of, it gets cut off, but a representation of his mature view, basically. That's not quite what he said. What he said is it does represent an early stage of his sadhana, and only parts of it remain true. Mm-hmm. And there have been additions since then. That's what he says roughly. Okay. Then she says, for example, take the 3rd level of realization, seeing the Purushottama, the Supreme Spirit, in and as all, the triple Purusha of chapter 15 of the Gita. In the Arya, the journal writings from 1914 to 1921, which include essays on the Gita, the Life Divine, and other of his books, the further realization involves an evolutionary transformation in which the Vijnana realization is followed by a descent. This is a technical word in Sri Aurobindo's lexicon, in which mind, life, and body are radically transformed. This may be the most significant difference between the Vijnana Vedanta of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda on the one hand, and the evolutionary Vedanta of Sri Aurobindo. Okay, that's a heavy comment, but I think quite insightful. And I have to preface my answer by saying this. See, I'm both a monk and an academic scholar. Okay, I have to wear these 2 caps. It's not always easy to Sometimes I attempt to wear them at the same time. It usually doesn't work. And so I either wear the one or the other. Okay. So now, because I gave a talk recently, a Sunday talk a couple weeks ago on Sri Ramakrishna and Sri Aurobindo. People seem to like it, but some people who know something about Sri Aurobindo, they say, well, you're downplaying the differences. Yes, I am downplaying the differences as a monk for the purposes of a Sunday sermon in our temple at the Vedanta Society. Mm-hmm. But I'm at the same time, I've got a book under contract with Oxford University Press. Now I'm wearing my academic philosopher cap. Okay. And that book it's a book-length academic study of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy in relation to Sri Ramakrishna. And I'm currently working on, it's a tough chapter, the first chapter of this book, where I'm working out the details of my interpretation, where I do tackle both the similarities and the differences. And what I'm arguing, what I found is, you cannot properly understand Sri Aurobindo's views unless you adopt a diachronic approach. Diachronic. How many people are nerdy enough to know what I mean by that? What does diachronic mean? I have talked to you this in the past. Good, yeah, what? Just
progression of time.
Yeah, you have to, a diachronic approach to Sri Aurobindo means you have to see how his views evolved in the course of time. Okay, and in my chapter, I'm going to make, this might be like a huge, almost 30,000 word chapter, because it's just getting bigger and bigger. Anyway, it took me a long time to figure this out. I think I'm onto something. I'm gonna try to divide his thinking into 3 phases. The first from 1905 to 1912, second from 1912 to 1926, third from 1926 to 1950 when he leaves his body. Okay. In the first phase is when he was tremendously influenced by Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. He was steeped in their life and their teachings. He had realizations very much akin to Ramakrishna's Vijnana. He's always praising them, and he specifically, in that period, says that Sri Ramakrishna was the last and greatest of all the avatars, for while others realized God in a single limited aspect, he realized God in his illimitable unity as the sum of an illimitable variety. So all these beautiful statements that he made about Ramakrishna, many of them occur in this period, okay? So now, see, up to 1912. Now, the thing is, this is what's important in relation to the question that this person is asking. It's a very good question, but it requires some nuance. He starts talking about the descent of the supermind before 1912. Okay, around 1912 is when he starts talking about it. The language of descent is used there. And in a particular essay, if you want the details, I read the chapter, it'll come out, but it's not going to come out for a while. I'll give you a hint. Sri Aurobindo, he wrote 10 or 11 unpublished, incomplete commentaries on the Isha Upanishad from 1902 all the way up to 1914, before he wrote his final published commentary on the Isha Upanishad in 1914 in the Arya. Okay, but in one of those commentaries, incomplete commentaries, that was published around 1913 or something like that, I had to check the exact date, he talks about the divine descent. Okay, not claiming that you find it directly in a verse in the Isha Upanishad, but he's kind of explaining his own philosophy. And when he says it, how he explains this descent is as follows. He says it's an internal transformation of the way we look at this world. Mm-hmm. Instead of looking at things as sense objects, as names and forms, we see everything as the divine, as different blissful manifestations of the divine. So it's like we're wearing these divine Vijnana glasses, and we see the whole world differently. That's what he meant by divine descent, as far as I can tell. Interestingly, what happens post-1912 is, and he says this explicitly in The Life Divine. So as she points out, there's this journal that they started coming out with called Arya, A-R-Y-A. And it started in 1914, ceases publication in 1921, so about 7 years. That is the most fertile period of his writing, okay? And all the books that we're aware of, or most of them, The Life Divine, The Synthesis of Yoga, Essays on the Gita, 1916 and 1920. So he published them first in the Arya. His commentary on the Isha Upanishad, a lot of things, okay? He publishes them there. But he would always revisit these things. And because his views are changing, he himself later, in the 20s, in the 30s, went back and revised these works. And so to really get a rigorous understanding of what Sri Aurobindo is doing and saying, you have to compare the original Arya editions of the texts with the later revisions / modifications to it to see how his thinking has changed. Okay, with all that in mind, now, in Life Divine, starting in around 1914, 15, 16, something like that, in the Arya, he starts talking about divine descent the descent of the supermind in a broader way to encompass two dimensions. The first is what I'm calling that internal dimension of the transformation of our vision. We see everything as divine oneness. That was there earlier in 1912. But he adds what I'm calling an external dimension of the descent of supermind. What do I mean by that? He says the internal transformation is not enough. The full descent of supermind necessitates a radical transformation of mind, life, and body, even externally. And then he literally says things like the physical body that we have, which will perish in about 80 to 100 years, it will be immortalized. Every cell of the body will be like divinized, and the physical body will no longer be subjected to disease or death. Okay? He gives little hints here in this period, and then it becomes more and more pronounced later. I think under the influence of Mira Alfassa, the mother, his female companion from France, because she first meets him in 1914. Because of the war, she goes to Japan and then France. Comes back in 1920. She becomes the mother and his spiritual collaborator, and she emphasizes this really hardcore. This idea of the transformation, the external transformation of the physical body, is to her crucial, and I think that rubs off on him. This is clearly not something emphasized in our tradition. That's what this woman or man, I have no idea who this person is. This is what this commenter is pointing out, is that one of the key differences between Sri Aurobindo's philosophy and the teachings of Ramakrishna and Swamiji is that he emphasizes not just the internal transformation of our vision, but also the actual literal divinization and eternal immortalization of the physical body. It's true that I think this is a major difference. Now, the thing is, in his last period, like post-1926, it's the first time you see Sri Aurobindo making somewhat critical remarks about Ramakrishna. I mean, critical might be too strong, but he basically says, he's pointing out where Ramakrishna falls short of what he's looking for. He's saying, look, Sri Ramakrishna was an avatara. He never denied that, but he never tried for the transformation, because he was completely surrendered to Divine Mother, and that kind of external transformation was not necessary in his case. That's why he died of throat cancer, and he kind of mentioned these kind of things. Okay, now, what Sri Aurobindo and Mother were both striving for, this is Mother Mira Alfassa, was going beyond even just the internal transformation and achieving this external transformation as well. And there's another thing, 1926, why is that date important? Sri Aurobindo claims that on that day, on a particular day in November, it was a descent not of supermind, but of overmind. Capital O, overmind. Okay. And then he says, he introduces this new category, which didn't exist before that realization in 1926. Okay. And then he actually looks back on his writings from the Adya period. He says this in a letter. He says, you know what? Sometimes when I refer to the supermind in those Adya writings, I'm actually referring to overmind, but because I hadn't had the overmind realization, I mistook it for supermind. So now I think what he's implying, it gets very complicated. So I think what he might be implying, toward the end of his life, I think this may be too strong, and I talked to one Aurobindo scholar about it, and he cringed at the language, but I think that what he does implicitly, at least, is he demotes Ramakrishna's realization of Vijnana to the overmental level. So he considered it supermental, I would say up through the Adya period, but then after that he demotes it to one notch down, and it's overmental, and that's why he doesn't have the external transformation that they also want for the divine descent to be complete. Okay. And so what he and Mother are trying to add, note the trying there, because look, they both are dead now too. So I'm not making fun of them, but it's just a fact here. Okay, so right, so they worked hard, but it didn't quite work. Okay, but another nuance which needs to be introduced, even in the Adya period, it's correct. This person is correct in pointing out that Essays on the Gita was published in the Adya between 1916 and 1920. Life Divine was published, blah, blah, blah. But here's something, I want the commentator to think about this and do your own research and see whether I'm right about this. Here's what I've noticed. When you look at the Adya writings, actually I would divide them into two categories. One are his scriptural commentaries. Like Essays on the Gita, Isha Upanishad, okay, those. Second his own original philosophical works, like The Life Divine and The Synthesis of Yoga. And I see a difference there, a discrepancy. In his original works, he is absolutely talking about both dimensions, the external and the internal dimensions of the descent of supermind. He says we need to divinize the physical body. All that stuff is there. I agree. I don't see it in the scriptural commentaries. He's not claiming that the Gita is teaching the need for the external transformation. In fact, there's a reason for it. Because, especially that he emphasized this post-1926, he's going beyond even the Vedantic scriptures. And that's important to him. And he says, even Krishna in the Gita is what he calls the over-mental Godhead. Even Krishna didn't reach the supermind. So it gets a little bit, arguably a little bit of a spiritual megalomania, possibly. I think partly under the influence of Mira Alfasa. And I have to be careful about the language I use in my scholarship. I have to see what, I'm going to get in trouble. But anyway, good thing not many people watch this class. Okay, so, anywho, so this is my challenge to you, commenter. I wish you could give me your name next time so I can, Anyway, I think he deliberately does not read the external transformation idea of the physical body into his commentary on the Gita for good reason, because he's one of the vociferous critics of people who commit eisegesis. We all know what that term means now.
It was like
putting one's own interpretation.
Very good. Reading your own views, your own pet ideas into the text. That's a big no-no for him. So now he's got a pet idea which he thinks is very original, which you don't even find really in the scriptures, you don't find even in the greatest saints, avatars. So this is a great scripture, Gita. This is what it teaches us. It mainly focuses on vijnana as a kind of internal transformation of our vision, as we've just seen in these preceding verses about seeing everything. You see everything is divine, sarva bhutastam yoma, right? But you don't see this idea of the divinization of the physical body. In fact, you see the opposite. The Gita says again and again, the world is anityam asukam. It's impermanent, devoid of happiness, no question of the body being immortalized. And he's saying, no, that's fine, because I'm taking a step further, right? That's what he's trying to. Yeah, Anthony.
Yeah, have you noticed changes in essays in the Gita that are based on his evolution and thought that we ought to know about in conjunction with what you're teaching?
Yeah.
We're looking at the original version, I assume?
No, we're looking at the revised version. But the thing is, there aren't heavy revisions. What he does is he'll sometimes add these footnotes. They're interesting footnotes, which will come up kind of later, where he'll kind of say things like, he'll link vijnana to supermind and then add things like, well, in the Gita it's not actually explicitly stated, but I'm just, we'll see. I mean, it's a good, let's keep our eyes out for it. And I'll try to point out those things when they're relevant. I think so far we haven't seen any major revisions to the original. It comes up kind of later, especially maybe starting with chapter 7, we'll see, because with the vijnana stuff, the terms jnana and vijnana come up for the first time, or for the first major time in chapter 7. Yeah.
Is he perhaps reasoning for a lot of the philosophy that related to Vajrayana Buddhism that actually pulled forth the idea of the rainbow body? Or
yeah, no, look, I think it has more to do with, first of all, his own spiritual realization, because in 1911, he claimed to have received certain instructions given to him in Sanskrit, from the divine, presumably, and he calls it Sapta-chatushtaya. This all gets very interesting. Sapta-chatushtaya means the 7 tetrads, 7 groups of 4. And one of them is called Vijnana Chatushtaya, which is interesting, in which he talks about siddhis. And he's actually kind of in favor of siddhis. And he brings up Ramakrishna and goes, I know Ramakrishna said we should avoid them, but at the same time, he himself exhibited siddhis. This is kind of what Sri Aurobindo is saying. So, and what we call siddhis now as ordinary human beings actually just become normal to a vijnani, is what he's basically saying. And so we should get used to it. And, it's a way of helping others and blah, blah, blah. And then he's got a separate tetrad called Sharira Chatushtayam, which means the tetrad of the body. And it's all about the immortalization of the body. That's as early as 1911. That starts cropping up in his works in the audio writings. Okay. And Mother Mira Alfasa, as I mentioned, French, she's from France. She was a painter as well. She was in the circle of painters, and she met like Matisse and other people. But at the same time, she was part of this occult I don't want to call it New Age, that's not nice. But it's like it's called...
It was New Age before New Age, so...
Yeah. It's Old Age New Age, or whatever it was. So it's cosmic, what is it? Something, cosmic. It's some cosmic philosophy, something, by Max Théon. He's the main guy, Theon. Theon. And she got from him several concepts, like the psychic being, and then also, I believe, corps glorieux in French, which means the glorious body. And she was really big on this from an early time. And then she meets him in 1914, and I think that she basically starts to overtake the influence of Thakur, of Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, and starts pushing these things and saying these are really, really crucial to your integral yoga. I don't know, maybe this is what I'm seeing from my diachronic research. Anyway, that's a long answer to the question because I think it's a deep question, an important one. For a full answer, you got to read chapter 1 of my book, which won't be published until probably 2027. Okay. But if you have further questions, you can follow up. Try to give me your name because then it'll be nicer. We'll have a human conversation. Okay. Okay. So now let's plunge in here. Verse 33. Please repeat after me. Arjuna uvacha. Yoyam yogas. Tvaya proktaha. Samyena. Madhusudana. Etasyaham na pashyami chanchalatvat sthitim stiram. Okay. Oh, so I just want to say one more thing about this whole diachronic thing, is that Sri Aurobindo's own followers, they see these three periods as a progression and evolution, right? And so it's like as a positive development, and they see him as kind of completing the project left incomplete by Ramakrishna and Vivekananda by adding this dimension of the external transformation. And you get a whole book on this called by an author named Kundan Singh, Singh, looking at the influence of Ramakrishna and Vivekananda on his thought, but then seeing Sri Aurobindo and then Mother as a kind of culmination of what they've started, basically, by adding the external dimension and other stuff, and the evolutionary thrust, yeah.
Well, if you look at like a lot of other ancient religions and stuff like that, they have these similar ideas of retaining the body and divinizing the body.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, if you go back into like Egyptian...
I think he'll concede it. Yeah, right. No, that's a good point. But has anyone succeeded? I think that's what they're asking.
I don't think that we know for sure if they have or not.
All right. Okay, that's a good point. Yeah. So, and they want to generalize it to all of humanity.
Babaji,
Huh?
for example, Babaji. Everyone talks about Babaji as being
which Babaji?
an immortal being.
He's mentioning...
Oh, Mahavata. I know that. In that yoga, Paramahamsa Yogananda tradition.
Yeah.
They claim that he immortalized his body?
Yes.
Is he still around?
Yes.
Where is he?
They say he's in the
Where is he?
Himalayas and that he can
With
I should pay him a visit.
His
Huh?
own 18 disciples who are also extended body.
Extension is like, that's a siddhi which has been around for a long time, but literally immortalizing
like
the body.
an actual body coming that has been living for hundreds of
See, this is where I kind of lose these Aurobindonians, to be honest. Like, I just why make such a big... See, here's my take on it. We talked about this one in relation to a question you had after my talk. I think at the end of the day, what Sri Aurobindo is saying, there are a couple of things. One is this theory of evolution, spiritual evolution. The idea is right now we're at the level of mind. Eventually, after a certain amount of time, we'll evolve from mind to supermind. I have no problem with that. But then he adds this. He goes, look, as spiritual aspirants, as integral yoga practitioners, we should try to accelerate this process of spiritual evolution by trying to invite the descent of the supermind, into the earth consciousness and blah, blah, blah. Okay, but with the end result of what? No, well, the end result is, as far as I can tell, is that you end up turning this earth into an eternal heaven. Okay, not bad. Fine. I'm totally cool with that. But why that needs to be a kind of be-all, end-all priority for us if there are already other lokas? It's fine. Some people may feel drawn to that and let them do it. But to claim that other paths are sort of deficient because they don't emphasize that so much is a little weird, because to me it's like it'll at best it becomes one eternal loka among others. And for some people, great. That's a great project to work on if you feel drawn to that project. But you're not inferior if you go to a different loka. It's already made. It's like, why do you have to construct your own house if there's already built a nice mansion up there already? I don't know. This is the thing I don't quite get, and I've asked a number of people in the tradition, Aurobindo tradition. I haven't got satisfactory answers. Another tough question I raised, I haven't gotten a satisfactory answer to this question either, is when they're using this lack of external transformation in Ramakrishna as a point of criticism, how far did they succeed?
Right.
I just don't quite see it. I mean, Sri Aurobindo had a light emanating from his body for a couple days after he died, but if that's all that he got after 27 years of sadhana in seclusion, I'm reminded of Thakur's story about the guy who spends a lot. You know the story about, huh?
The Kechari Mudra. He stays in the samadhi for.
No, the different one. I'm thinking of a different. I know the one you're talking about. No, I'm thinking of this one where I'm not sure if it's in the gospel or somewhere else, where he says basically like somebody spends decades cultivating a particular siddhi. What's the siddhi? And this guy gets after that, a lot of hard work. He goes, hey, watch. And he tells his friend, like, watch what I can do. And he's able to walk over the water like Jesus allegedly did. And the guy, he comes back and he goes, aren't you impressed? He's like, watch. I've got the same siddhi. He pays 2 cents to a boatman. And that's what you got after that? Like, well, come on, guys. So anyway, I don't know. I maybe I'm being superficial or not being fair to the tradition, but these are the things I'm getting stuck on or tripping over when I start to think of the ways that Sri Aurobindo and Mother think that they're going beyond Ramakrishna and what they've actually achieved beyond that. I get theoretically that there are certain advances, or they see them as advances. I don't think Ramakrishna would deny the possibility of the immortalization of the body, for instance, or this evolution of supermind. But why we all, as spiritual aspirants, need to make that our priority. I also want to add one more thing. I asked this when I was in Pondicherry a few months ago to some people in the tradition, Aurobindo tradition. I said, how does that affect the day-to-day spiritual practice for even people in the fully in the Aurobindo tradition? Does it affect it? Because supermind is such a far-off ideal. And actually, Sri Aurobindo, even in the mature period, talks about what he calls the triple transformation. Okay. He says psychic transformation, spiritual transformation, and then the supramental transformation. Psychic transformation is bringing the psychic being to the front, which is essentially like the individual soul in us. Second is the spiritual transformation, where you realize the non-dual self, permeating this whole universe. And then the third is the supramental. And one person asks, not just one person, many people get kind of like overexcited about this integral yoga sadhana and the supermind, and then one guy actually literally called Ramakrishna a spiritual pygmy compared to Sri Aurobindo. And then Sri Aurobindo was like, whoa, like why are you trying to put words in my mouth? That's not at all what I think about Ramakrishna. But they were starting to become like a little unhinged or maybe like megalomaniacal about their tradition being superior to others. But in response to a question where one of these people goes like, so, it reminds me of certain questions asked to certain Swami about non-duality, where I'm really close to realizing the non-dual conscious, and it just feels a little. And so it's kind of like, it reminds me of this, because they're like, so like I'm at the overmental level and I'm just one step away from the supermind, and he's like, whoa, like he goes, back up, honey. He goes, he says, if you start talking about supermind and overmind now, it's only going to be a source of ego. He literally says this. He says, you need to focus on the psychic transformation, the supramental, not the supramental, and the spiritual. So which the old yogas cover perfectly well. So cultivate bhakti, cultivate surrender, all this stuff about supermind, he says, get it out of your head. He literally says this, more or less. That's a theoretical idea that comes for extraordinarily advanced spirituals. So even they, obvious. So far, nobody has succeeded, as far as I can tell, but arguably. So at a data, and then that's how they responded. Actually, these people who are more sensitive, they said, "Yeah, it doesn't affect us at a data level because supermind plays no role in what we're doing. We haven't realized God yet. First, realize God. Be the baby kitten first, and then let Mother work through you." And right, I mean, so even then, at the day-to-day spiritual practice level, I don't see much of a difference.
The question I've been trying to ask is, does this, I am not the body because I am the body, and I'm being sarcastic, he's not literally saying that. But does some of this stuff where he goes way out on the limb later, color, or should it color our interpretation of what you've been teaching us? In other words, the fact that he went out to where he went out to, wherever that is, which I don't fully understand, should we be looking at it and saying, well, all right, the seeds we're in, what we're learning, do we need to look at it more skeptically?
Oh, I think we should always look at things, not skeptically might be too strong, but critically. Critically, which means Sri Ramakrishna, one of his great teachings, but it's impossible to translate. He says, Golmala che golda badya malta nebe, which means, in Bengali, golmal means trouble. And then it's a word which he's playfully pointing out is comprised of two words. Gol itself means trouble, and mal means the essence or the good stuff. And he says, when you're confronted with something, try to separate what's useful and beneficial to you from what's not. Fortunately, as far as I can tell, in his commentary, as I said, I don't find the emphasis on external transformation at all. And so I don't even think we even see seeds there because he doesn't think it's in the Gita. And as I said, he's trying not to. I think he's pretty careful not to read his own ideas in the scripture. Otherwise, he loses originality, right? If he says it's already in the Gita, where does that leave it? So anyway, I don't think we have to worry about it too much. If you think that there are places where you see seeds of the idea, let me know, and that would be. I think you see seeds in Isha Upanishad in the commentary, maybe seeds, slight seeds, but I don't see it anywhere in the Gita. Okay. All right. Any other questions before we?
There are some online questions.
Oh boy. Okay. Go ahead. Fine. So this is an important issue. I think we can tackle it. Yeah.
Gita Stevens, she says, doesn't Thakur accept divinization of the body with his mentioning of Bhagavati Tanu?
Yeah, that's interesting. There are a couple places in the gospel where he says a couple things. When you realize God, you develop. In one place, he calls them prema chakshu. You develop love eyes, and he says love organs, love sexual organs. He says it, and then M starts laughing, and he's completely serious. He doesn't let it, and he just says yes, you literally, and then and there's another place where he says Bhagavati Tanu, you develop a divine body. I don't think Sri Ramakrishna is saying there that that's the direct external transformation of the physical body, because if it were, Ramakrishna's body would have been transformed. He certainly had the prema chakshu, the love eyes. He certainly had the Bhagavati Tanu. I think it's a non-physical body he's talking about.
It's transcendental body that
Transcendental
Krishna
body
says that you will receive.
Something like that. Yeah, I don't see that as a physical body. I don't think Ramakrishna valued the transformation of the physical body. Otherwise, because so many people are asking him, ask Divine Mother to cure you of your cancer. He could have. He says, I can't do it. I refuse to. This is not. I don't go to God for these things. And what's the point? Another thing I want to mention in this context. Ramana Maharshi was a contemporary of Sri Aurobindo's. He was a staunch classical Advaitin. Some people who are familiar with Sri Aurobindo's thought visited Ramana Maharshi. And one guy, this is recorded in the talks with Ramana Maharshi. It's really fascinating. 30s, 40s, something like that. Before Sri Aurobindo left his body, because Sri Aurobindo found out about it and talked about it. Somebody asked Ramana Maharshi, hey, so Sri Aurobindo keeps talking about this external transformation thing, divinization, immortalization of the physical body. What do you think about this? And then Rāmānuja Maharshi gives a really trenchant critique of that doctrine from the standpoint of classical Advaita Vedanta, saying that, look, the body is part of Maya, it's an illusion, so as long as you're caught up and preoccupied with trying to divinize that, you're working at cross purposes with your spiritual life and blah, 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 all that. And that's reported to Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo kind of digs his heels in and says, well, that's a classical Advaita approach, and my approach is different. So what I'm going to try to do in the last section of chapter 1 of my book, which is called Going Beyond Ramakrishna ? I'm going to start by saying, look, I know that the standard way within their tradition to narrativize this thing is that it's one of progression and going beyond Ramakrishna, and Mother completes even Sri Aurobindo's vision, because Sri Aurobindo doesn't quite bring down the supermind, he brings down overmind. In 1956, she brings down, it's called the Golden Day, and then she breaks open a golden door, and then she brings down supermind, all this stuff. I say there's another way to look at it, and then I'm gonna quote this Rāmānuja Maharshi's critique of Sri Aurobindo's idea of the external transformation, and then say, look, what I want to explore is a kind of Ramakrishnan critique of his doctrine of external transformation. It's not going to be the same as a classical Advaitic, obviously, because it's a different philosophical framework, but I think it can be done. And this is a different way of thinking about the trajectory from Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, Mother Mira Alfasa. Okay, so anyway, there's a lot there. Any other questions? Or?
One more.
Okay, all right. The whole class is going in. It is an interesting. Yeah, okay, fine.
Andrew says,
Andrew.
Isn't what happened to Jesus after the crucifixion, resurrection and teaching of disciples, immortalization of the body?
Well, where is he now? I don't know. I mean, he was resurrected, but is he still here somewhere lurking? Like, is he with that other guy? Are they just hanging out in the cave together?
Just wherever you have
Apparently
communion.
they live like not on
Right.
this plane, but they can materialize on this explained. That's
Sure.
what I've heard.
But if we're
Sri Yukteswar,
Okay.
Yogananda's.
yeah, I know
Yeah.
the Yukteswar Giri.
Yeah.
But the thing is, they are talking about full-blown physical
Yeah.
body. I want to see it.
Yeah.
I want to see it. I don't want it to be anything invisible. I want it to be visible, and I want you to be eternal. I want to take a sledgehammer here, and then I want to see it not dripping blood, and I want to see you like not flinching. And I don't quite get it.
But
But
this is a serious point. Do they ever say the actual literal body?
yes, absolutely,
Not a
Many-
picture, not the fact that it's
absolutely not. Many times, and they're emphatic about it.
Okay.
It's very, very clear.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the
Then it
thing.
seems
Because they would suggest
odd.
that the 12
This is where I kind of lose the tradition, and I mean, and so what I'm gonna say is, I like the Aurobindo. It's like liking the Grateful Dead in a certain period, you know. So it's like, I like the Arya up to Arya period Aurobindo in the scriptural commentaries without the external transformations. I'm with them until there, but
Were they by any chance competing with the Theosophists at that time?
Yeah,
Because
that's what I was
Theosophists
thinking.
were also.
look, the thing is, remember, Mira Alfasa herself was strongly influenced by these occult movements. So it's not about competing; it's about
Okay.
she is his spiritual collaborator, and then she takes over after 1950, and she is suffused with these ideas in the first place. These are all like current at the
So
time.
she had some influence from Theosophy.
Well, look, Theosophy is one of those late 19th century
Okay.
movements that was like linked to, and Theon was probably influenced, that main guy, Max Theon.
Okay.
So there's it's in the air, you know. Even when Swamiji came here in the late 1890s, he's seeing the same stuff, New Age movements, this faith healing, and then a bunch of stuff, seances. Like this is in France too. This was a huge thing. So, but the thing is, like Sri Aurobindo, I find to be generally a sober and humble person. He'll be straight. He's very frank, and so he's honest about his spiritual experiences. That's why I appreciate. If you look at Peter Heese's book, a biography on Sri Aurobindo called "The Lives of Sri Aurobindo," which created so much controversy that one of the Aurobindo people named Shraddhalu Ranade raised a huge stink about it, got the Supreme Court in India to ban the book. It's intense. Like, we didn't go that far, thankfully, in the Ramakrishna tradition with the Kripal's book and all that. It should not be banned. You can criticize it and point out the mistakes. But anyway, the book itself is actually quite valuable. It doesn't mean I agree with everything he says. I actually disagree with some things. But it's very sober. He's a professional intellectual historian and an Aurobindo ashramite. He lives there. I visited him a couple months ago in the Aurobindo archives. So he says he spends a few pages tracking Sri Aurobindo's efforts to bring the supermind into earth consciousness. And Sri Aurobindo never claims. Like, people wanted him to say that the 1926 thing was the descent of the supermind. He's like, no, that was overmind. And then toward the end of his life, somebody just point blank asked him, one of his attendants named Monilal, he says, have you realized supermind? And he says something like, I know what it is. And then he goes, but I'm not there yet. What I've been trying to do in the past few decades is supramentalize the overmind. Supramentalize the overmind. Which means he, as far as I can tell, he himself admitted that he didn't realize the supermind. Of course, that is, I mentioned that to one follower of the Aurobindo tradition. They vociferously deny it. They're distinguishing the attainment of supermind, which they claim he attained long back, from the bringing the supermind into the earth consciousness, which he failed to attain, and which Mother then attained in 1956. It gets really complicated. But it's fascinating to me that Sri Aurobindo never actually said he attained supermind, as far as I can tell. If so, anybody who's there, who's on the Aurobindo side, please do give me that evidence. If you think that Sri Aurobindo attained supermind, whether he had a supramental realization, let me know what you think corresponds to that in his texts. Okay. Any other questions before we move on?
I think through you he will attain the supermind.
Whoa. Wow.
Just a comment.
Okay.
He's still working.
It's heavy stuff.
He's still in your body. I had a vision of it. Just
Yeah. Oh no! Now we're getting.
Oh my god.
We're getting catty. All right. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Because the Gita class have to go on.
Yeah, we need to have a real Gita class. Okay.
we'll have an eternal Gita class, and we'll just keep going. All right. Okay. We got to get to these verses now. Okay. So Okay. Now, see, after 32 verses of Sri Krishna teaching Aurobindo these high-level meditation techniques, you've got to meditate on the self. Huh?
Arjuna.
What did I say?
Aurobindo.
Did I say Aurobindo?
Yeah.
Yeah, you did.
Got him on my mind, man. Huh?
Yeah, he
I
did.
meant Arjuna is what I said.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted
It's
to
like
say.
I'm teaching Aurobindo and I was like, what?
It's not because I'm in the middle of this chapter, the first chapter of this book. It's like I'm in this flow state and I can't get out of it. Anyway, so okay, Arjuna gets intimidated, and he's like, kind of like how Aurobindo's followers get when he talks about Superman and all that. So, so he's like, but that was conscious. So Arjuna's like, boy, this stuff. I mean, look, I'm trying, but I can't control my mind. So this is what these verses are going to talk about. What about ordinary people like us who are struggling even to get by in life and this and that? Okay, so this is what he says. He says, look, this yoga that you're talking about, tvaya prokta, okay, samyena madhusudana, which is of the nature of samya. This is the Sanskrit word used, samya, S-A-M-Y-A. We're going to get to that in a second, what it might mean. Sri Aurobindo renders it as this yoga which is of the nature of equality. Okay. Etasyaham napashami chanchalatvat siddhim. I can't even begin to fathom or reach the goal of this yoga. Why? Because of restlessness of mind. This is like the number one complaint of spiritual aspirants, especially in our tradition, because gurus in our tradition will give you a mantra and then tell you to do mantra japa, while also visualizing the Ishta Devata in your heart, usually. And so it's a combination of repetition of the mantra, mental repetition, along with the meditation technique, which is you're actually trying to visualize and concentrate on the Ishta Devata, right? Okay. If you ask Sarvadeva or any other guru in our tradition, you ask him, what's the number one question asked? I bet he'll say, I don't know. I can't say for sure. But very, very frequently, because I get the same question, even though I'm not a guru, and I'm asked by devotees, well, but my mind is so restless, I can't, as soon as I start doing the mantra japa, my mind starts wandering. Very, very common complaint. This is what Arjuna is complaining about, as far as I can tell. Okay. So now, next verse, 6.34. Please repeat after me. Chanchalam himanaha Krishna pramati balavad dridham tasyaham nigraham manye vayor iva sudushkaram. All right. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping back and forth here, but I just promised I would talk about samyena here in the previous verse, so let me just quickly talk about that. So this yoga of the nature of equality, there are actually different interpretations. Swami Tapasyananda, in his interpretation, he renders this as this yoga involving the cultivation of equanimity, perfect calmness of mind. I think Sri Aurobindo is not that it's not equanimity, but I think there's a deeper meaning of it, which I think Sri Aurobindo gets at when he says this yoga of the nature of equality. And Rāmānuja, in his commentary on this, he interprets this samya, the state of being samya, as the samadarshana mentioned in 6.29. Remember the verses we talked about last time? Where you see everything as the same divine. You see divine oneness in this entire universe. So I think both Sri Aurobindo and Rāmānuja agree that this yoga of samya is the yoga of equality, in the sense that, like Sri Ramakrishna would distinguish Daya and Maya. I've talked about this a lot. Maya is you have love for those that are your own, for me and mine. My kids, my spouse, my this, my that, my car, because they're yours, but there's a selfish attachment at the bottom. And then he contrasts that with Daya. You have equal love for everybody, seeing the same divine in all beings. And then on that basis, the ethical doctrine is Shiva Jnani Jiva Seva. Serve others in a spirit of worship by trying to see the same divine. So that sameness of Samya here, I think, goes back to the immediately preceding verses, 29 to 32, talking about seeing the same divine in everyone. I think Sri Aurobindo has that in mind when he talks about this yoga of the nature of equality. I think Rāmānuja has it in mind when he talks about having this equal vision, seeing the divine in all. I think Swami Tapasyananda's interpretation is, I think, not quite as deep, I'm saying, in that way. And I think that the more Ramakrishna interpretation will be the Vijnana approach, seeing divine oneness in everything. And it works better in the context of the Gita, because it goes back to the previous verses. Okay, now, coming to verse 34. Janjalam This means restless. He says, Arjuna is saying, Krishna, my mind is just so restless. And then he uses 3 adjectives. Vehement, strong, unconquerable, no matter how much I try. And the more I try, the more the mind is eluding my grasp and my control. And we all know this. Anybody, any spiritual aspirant who's tried to control the mind or has tried to meditate will know this. This is the hardest thing to do. In fact, Swami Vivekananda, in his book Raja Yoga, when he's talking about meditation. So actually, to get to that, before I get to that, Arjuna is using a poetic metaphor, and he says, I deem the mind to be as hard to control as the wind. It's like if you're trying to control the wind, right? How are you going to control the wind? Almost impossible, right? Swamiji says, he uses an even more colorful analogy. He says, the human mind is like that monkey, or a monkey, imagine. This is in context. The human mind is like a monkey, not just a monkey. A monkey is already restless, incessantly active by its own nature. Then it becomes drunk with the wine of desire, thus increasing its turbulence. After desire takes possession, comes the sting of the scorpion of jealousy at the success of others. And last of all, the demon of pride enters the mind, making it think itself of all importance. So I think this is the situation with the mind. And I think it's even more colorful than what the Gita gives us. We've got a drunk monkey bitten by a scorpion of jealousy, who is also possessed by the demon of pride. So it's a fourfold restlessness and madness, which is preventing us from being able to concentrate on what we're trying to concentrate on. This is a Bengali phrase that I like mentioning a lot. Gyan papi, one of these amazing Bengali phrases. Gyana papi. It means you know what's right, what you should be doing, and yet you do the opposite. And look at Rani Rashmani, the owner of the Kali temple in Dokkineshwar that Sri Ramakrishna was living in. And she's supposed to be doing arati or something. And Ramakrishna can read people's minds. This is a siddhi. This is what Sri Aurobindo is pointing out, is that even though Sri Ramakrishna was against siddhis, he did have siddhis. He didn't encourage the cultivation of siddhis, but he could read people's minds. There's that one very interesting incident when he actually, toward the end of his life, when he's bedridden with throat cancer in Kashipur, his beloved future monastic disciples, a few of them, like Hari Maharaj and others, are out in the woods, like nearby. And one of them is about to step on a snake, like a cobra, a poisonous cobra. Ramakrishna somehow knows from his deathbed inside in Kashipur that they're about to do that. And he zooms down at like lightning speed to protect them and then shoo away the cobra, and then he comes back. And like, I think Holy Mother, somebody like noticed him doing that. So this is clearly a siddhi. This is not, that's impossible for somebody with that level of, that stage of throat cancer. And so it's not that he never exhibited siddhis. Anyway, again, we're going to get into Aurobindo if we go too far in this direction. So let's curb my Aurobindonian enthusiasm here. Okay, so now I see I lost my thread. Okay, what was I talking about? Rani Rashmani. So he's using a siddhi. He recognized that even though she's supposed to be worshipping Kali, her mind is on some kind of lawsuit or something. What does he do? I don't think it's backhand. It's probably front-handed. So, that would be too much. That'd be too much. You'd be a wife beater. Yeah, or not a wife. Anyway, so it is a little gentle tap just to kind of, So, and then, so he's an avatara correcting this woman who, so it's very hard to control our minds. And she's got God himself sitting next to her, and she can't control her mind. Keep her mind fixed on Kali when she's doing worship, and so let alone us, poor people, right? So we're all in the position of Arjuna here. That's the beauty of this text, is that Arjuna really is every man, every woman, every human man. Don't freak out. All right, every human, every being. Okay, and he makes the whole thing relatable. The moment that Gita starts getting high pitched, Arjuna brings the whole thing down to earth, and he goes, but, Actually, same thing happens with Aurobindo. Sorry, but anyway, I have to do this because no, really, because Aurobindo goes on these high flights of supermind and the descent of the supermind and external transformation, and it's hilarious. I think Aurobindo is at his most accessible and charming in his letters on yoga. There are these 4 volumes of complete works. And the kinds of questions, some of the questions are like very high philosophical questions. Some of them are is it okay that I masturbate? I'm not kidding. Like, it's like super mundane, and he's like, what? Like, this is the kind of stuff he has to deal with when he's in seclusion. He's gonna respond. He's like, no, it's not okay. So anyway, so it's kind of like that. It's like Krishna's going on these long things, and Arjuna's, but I can't even control my mind, let alone focus on the Atman and this and that. It's super hard, you know. Okay. All right. So now, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha. This is verse 35. So please repeat after me. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha.
Shri Bhagavan Uvacha.
This is Krishna's answer to Arjuna's question, which is common to most of us as spiritual aspirants. Asamshayam
Asamshayam
Mahabaho
Mahabaho
Mano
Mano
Durnigraham Chalam
Durnigraham Chalam
Abhyasena
Abhyasena
Tukaunteya
Tukaunteya
Vairagyena
Vairagyena
Chagrihyate.
Chakrihyate.
All right. Very important. This is the first verse in his 2-verse answer to Arjuna's question, but it's the heart of his answer, actually. So, he begins by sympathizing with Arjuna, fortunately. God is kind. No doubt, asamsham, O Arjuna, mano durnigraham chalam. It's very, very hard to control the mind. Okay? Durnigraham is an interesting word here, and Madhusudana Saraswati has a very interesting take on this. Most people will just say it just means it's very hard to control. Durnigraham. Nigraham typically means control. It's hard to control. Madhusudana Saraswati was a kind of bhakti-oriented follower of Śaṅkara. Okay? Still a classical Advaitin metaphysically, but had bhakti leanings. What he says here is, he says, Durnigraham, what Krishna is saying, there's a kind of psychological insight here, which is that you should not try to restrain the mind violently. Because and he's kind of looking at the word nigraha here, because it's used actually in an earlier verse, if you remember, nigraha kim karishati prakratim yanti bhutani nigraha kim karishati. What's the point in trying to forcibly restrain prakriti, your own nature, because it's too strong? And don't repress. And remember that in the context of that verse, Sri Aurobindo says what the Gita is teaching us is not to repress or suppress, but to sublimate, to channel our energy toward the divine. Right? So that's kind of what Madhusudana is reading into Durnigram here. He's saying that Krishna is saying, look, like, I know the mind is very restless. One mistake you could make in this context is to just like do a kind of frontal attack on the mind and say, like, I'm going to force you to focus on what I want you to focus on. That doesn't work in the beginning. And there can easily be a violent reaction if you try that kind of method. I've seen this in cases where even among some monks, what happens is they do too much japa too quickly. That they'll suddenly increase from doing 108 to doing 10,000 or something, because they read it and some great saint is saying, I do 10,000. Holy Mother, this is day, because she, how much she used to say she would do? 100,000. She points to the clock and then. So we're trying to do 100,000 and we're going to fall flat on our face, because that's, if you just calculate that in terms of how many seconds it takes her to repeat the mantra once, it's extremely fast, and it's continuous for almost 24 hours in order to get 100,000 in there. So, but some people, they're like, well, Holy Mother said it, so we should try to emulate her. And you can go off the deep end that way. So I think that's useful. Madhusudana's interpretation of Durnigram here is, yes, acknowledge our weakness and acknowledge where we are. Don't try to be a hero and think that you can control the mind overnight. That's not the way it works. Shanaihi uparamet is a phrase used just earlier in the same chapter, which means you have to slowly, gradually, and gently try to bring the mind under control. That's really important to keep in mind. And then, the key to his answer, Krishna says, through 2 means, you will be able to control even the most restless mind. What are these 2 techniques? Abhyasa and Vairagya. Abhyasa just means constant practice, but we're going to go into in a second what practice of what. And then Vairagya, a very common term in Indian spiritual texts. Often it's translated as renunciation, sometimes as dispassion, sometimes as detachment. These are all different connotations of this. I like the idea of translating as either detachment or as renunciation of all worldly attachments and desires. Note, this is not physical renunciation of action, so it doesn't mean that you can't be in the world. No, if you're in the world, don't be You can be in the world, but don't be of it, right? That's the expression. Be like a lotus leaf floating on the water. Okay, that's why it's an inner renunciation of worldly, but it's a necessity in spiritual life to have this vairagya. That's indispensable. It's a prerequisite. What I'm finding these days is people want spirituality on the cheap. And how are they getting it? Through drugs. How are they doing it? I found this like in random places. Like people doing pranayama, which is this breath control thing. Okay. And they do a lot of it too. And Swami Vivekananda in Raja Yoga explicitly warns against doing that, a lot of it. I mean, if you just do a little bit for 5 minutes casually, that's okay. But if you're doing it seriously for, a long time, it's extremely dangerous if you're not perfect in brahmacharya, if you're not at least very vigilant about celibacy and purity. That's the vairagya element. And the two go hand in hand, they're complementary. And the two are absolutely indispensable. You can't have one without the other. And if you're just doing the abhyasa, so what I'm finding these days is people are coming up with some kind of spiritual technique, but without the basis of vairagya, without renunciation. And some of the most popular spiritual gurus and teachers, they'll talk aloud about certain practices while downplaying the vairagya dimension, the detachment, the renunciation. But renunciation is a must for everybody across the board. Not external renunciation, but this is a must. Inner renunciation of worldly attachment and desires is an absolute must. And if you are engaging in all sorts of abhyasas, with whether it's mindfulness, whether it's non-dual, self-inquiry, whether it's pranayama, I'm not saying not to do those things. They have to go hand in hand with vairagya. And if you're not, you're working at cross purposes with yourself, and you might go crazy. Either crazy, or you're just not going to make much progress. It's like Sri Ramakrishna will say, it's like when you're pouring water into a leaky vessel. Whatever you do, you're doing it. That's the abhyasa. But without vairagya, you have to stop the leak first. It'll all come out in the end. And you might think there could be an illusion of progress, and that could be even more dangerous, because then you get this whole self-deception creeping into your spiritual life. So it's very, very dangerous. But a lot of the most popular spiritual movements are emphasizing the abhyasa minus the vairagya. And I think that's a huge problem. I think that's one of the reasons why I think this specific verse is so important in spiritual life. Okay, do you guys have questions about... let's conclude with... another thing I want to say. In the Gospel, Sri Ramakrishna asks M, what is vairagya? He kind of tests him and quizzes him once in a while, because he knows this is going to come out as a book in the future, and M is his chosen, the transcriber. And so he says, what is vairagya? And M gives an answer that really pleases Sri Ramakrishna. He says, Bishwar prati virag or Ishwara prati anurag. You should have viraga, same word as vairagya, toward sense objects, toward vishaya. But M doesn't stop there. And you should have anuraga, which means like a bhakti and a love and a devotion for God, for the divine. And the two have to go hand in hand. This is also really important, because if you just emphasize the one, which is just, I'm going to just renounce everything. And I had this attitude when I first left the US and when I first came to India. And I was not a bhakta at the time. I was a kind of agnostic Śaṅkarite. That's how I would characterize myself. And then I found that's not a firm enough basis. You need to have something positive. This purely negative self-effort, kind of like, I'll just renounce on my own, like the baby monkey and all that, it can work for some time. It doesn't work in the long run, and you fall flat on your face. You need this positive dimension at the same time. The two have to go hand in hand. So then when bhakti came in, then first of all, I started moving from baby monkey to baby cat. Not that I'm a pure baby cat, but that there's a mixture at least, which is very... it's very important to have some of that baby cat in you, and to recognize that you won't achieve anything through your own self-effort. And then secondly, divine grace. That's the crucial thing. That's the missing element that I wasn't acknowledging or accepting before, but which I came to accept by God's grace. Now I see. It's by God's grace that I accept God's grace. And interestingly, in the next verse, Rāmānuja, not a coincidence because he's a great bhakta, in 36, this is how we're going to end. So we'll end with this quickly. We've already read the verse, right? Or no, have we not? Oh, okay. So please repeat after me. We'll do it very quickly. Asañyatātmana yogo dushprapa
Dushprapa
iti me matihi
iti me matihi
vashyatmana
Vashyatmana
tu yatata
Tuyatata
shakyo vaptum
Sakyo Vaptum
upayataha.
Upayataha.
Okay. It's a relatively simple verse to understand word for word. It just means, he's saying, for one who is asanyatatmana, which means somebody whose mind is not controlled. Literally, atma means self. You might have caught. He doesn't say mind exactly. But in this context, almost all the commentators take it as mind. Aurobindo says who is not self-controlled. That's fine. But I think specifically he has in mind the mind, but also, just in general, the self, the whole psychophysical complex. Okay, dusprapa iti me matihi. Yoga is very, very hard to attain for people who do not have self-control, who lack self-control. And then the next line, it says, vashyatmanatu, but for those who do have self-control, who have been able to control the self, shakyo vaptum upayataha, for people who are hard at work, who are strivers, sincere spiritual aspirants, they are able to attain this yoga through properly directed efforts, upayataha. Okay. Now again, you might think, well, that sounds like a lot like the baby monkey, and it's all very self-effort focused. Rāmānuja adds here, I think, and this is something that Sri Aurobindo actually doesn't give detailed commentaries on these verses, as far as I'm aware. But Rāmānuja nicely adds, what is this vashyatmana, the person who is able to control the self? He says, you can attain this yoga by controlling the self through worship of and service to the divine. So he brings in this bhakti element here. This is the way. He's basically saying, this is kind of like telling me the earlier Ayan Maharaj, when I first started out, when I was that agnostic Śaṅkarite, saying like, look man, you can't do it on your own. Vashyatmana, Rāmānuja says, at some point you're going to have to realize that through self-effort alone you cannot control the mind. You have to surrender to God, and you have to worship God and accept God, this higher power. It's like the AA, that step, where it's like when you hit rock bottom, finally you have to accept a higher power. I went through that, and I think not all spiritual aspirants, some of them lean so Advaitic, classical Advaitic, that they just don't have a bhakti bone in their body. But I thought I was like that, and I prided myself on being that, and then look at me now. So anyway, God has his own. Man proposes, God disposes. Okay, so any questions before we wrap up this class? No? Great. Look at that. All right. So keep in mind that stuff I was saying about Aurobindo, and as I said, if it comes up, if you see seeds of that kind of external transformation of the body in the Gita, let me know and we can talk about it. And as I said, best approach is not to get angry with Aurobindo, and don't get emotional. Emotions always mess things up. I'm serious. Let's be serious here. We're spiritual aspirants. Look, he was a great saint, absolutely no doubt. And if you see certain things that are helpful to you and beneficial, take them and accept them. And if you see certain things that you don't find as useful, ignore them. Don't jump on him and don't get emotional about it. And especially with like spiritual aspects, what happens is they belong to tradition, they start getting fanatical about their guru. It's very easy to get caught up in that stuff. I think it's very, very dangerous. That's another form of ego. So it's really important that we not like, you insulted my mother. Like don't get in the schoolboy fight on this. This is not. Let's be dignified here. When they go low, you go high. Michelle Obama. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. All right, but I'm sure some people will not follow Michelle